For centuries, ancient warriors and modern athletes have sought the perfect diet for peak male performance. Let's trace the complete history and modern evolution of foods that increase testosterone. But before we begin, one thing has to be said plainly, because almost no one says it. No food on earth flips a switch and floods your body with testosterone. That isn't how the endocrine system works, and any video that promises otherwise is selling you something. What food can do, what it has always done, is supply the raw materials the body needs to produce the hormone, and remove the deficiencies that quietly suppress it. That distinction is the whole story. It's the difference between a myth that has survived 3,000 years and a biology that we've only understood for about 90. So this is not a list of magic foods. It's the history of an idea that what a man eats shapes what a man becomes, and the slow, uneven, occasionally absurd journey that idea took from the battlefield to the laboratory. Let's start at the beginning. The earliest beliefs about masculine vitality were built on a simple kind of logic. If you wanted the qualities of a powerful animal, you ate that animal. If you wanted the potency of a particular plant, you consumed it. This is what anthropologists call sympathetic thinking, the assumption that traits transfer through contact. It was wrong in its mechanism, but it was not always wrong in its results. In ancient Greece, the diet of the Olympic athlete became a subject of serious attention. Early competitors ate mostly bread, figs, cheese, and olives. But by the 5th century BC, a shift occurred. Athletes began consuming large quantities of meat, and the trainers of the era wrote about it as a deliberate strategy for building the body. The wrestler Milo of Croton, the most celebrated strongman of antiquity, was said to eat extraordinary amounts of meat daily. Whether the legend is exact hardly matters. What matters is that the connection between animal protein and physical power had entered the culture, and it never really left. The Greeks also prized certain foods for what they called aphrodisiac quality, a word that comes from Aphrodite herself. Honey, certain shellfish, and specific herbs were thought to govern desire and virility. They had no concept of a hormone, but they had observed correctly that diet and male vigor were linked, and they organized their meals around that observation. Move east, and the same conviction appears in a completely independent tradition. In classical Chinese medicine, foods were sorted by their warming or tonifying properties, and a whole category was devoted to what was called kidney yang, the body's reserve of masculine, generative energy. Walnuts, certain seeds, shellfish, and organ meats were prescribed to strengthen it. Again, no hormones, no biochemistry. But the foods that ended up on these lists are striking, because many of them are genuinely dense in zinc and healthy fats, and those, as we'll see, turn out to matter. This is the recurring pattern of the ancient world. The reasoning was mystical. The food choices were often quietly sound. If the philosophers theorized about vitality, the soldiers depended on it, and military history gives us some of the clearest records of what men ate when their lives depended on strength and endurance. The Roman legionary marched on grain, but the records show he also received rations of pork, cheese, and a sour wine that provided calories and morale. The empire understood logistically what it could not explain biologically, that a fighting man's diet determined whether an army could march, lift, build, and survive. Strength was a supply chain problem before it was a science. Among the Norse and across northern Europe, the warrior's diet leaned heavily on fish, game, dairy, and fat. The cold demanded it. And here we encounter something the ancients could never have measured, but were nonetheless consuming in abundance: animal fats and cholesterol. The body manufactures testosterone from cholesterol. It is the literal starting molecule. A diet rich in eggs, fatty fish, and animal fat was, without anyone knowing it, a diet rich in the chemical precursor of the hormone these men associated with their fighting spirit. The mythology and the mechanism were finally, accidentally, pointing in the same direction. The warrior who ate the fatty, protein-heavy diet of his climate was giving his body the building blocks it needed. He attributed the result to the courage of the animal he ate. We now attribute it to chemistry. Both men were looking at the same plate. For a very long stretch of human history, through the medieval and early modern periods, the science stood still while the folklore grew louder. This was the age of the aphrodisiac in its most theatrical form. Rare and expensive foods were credited with extraordinary powers, often for reasons that had nothing to do with their content. Asparagus, certain roots, exotic spices, and shellfish were sold and traded as virility foods. Some of this was the doctrine of signatures, the belief that a food's shape or appearance revealed its purpose. A food that resembled part of the male body was assumed to strengthen it. It was visual poetry mistaken for medicine. And yet, buried in the nonsense, the oyster kept reappearing across cultures as the supreme food of male vitality. For centuries, no one could say why. The answer, when it finally came, was almost anticlimactic. The oyster is one of the most zinc-dense foods in existence, and zinc is essential to testosterone production. The folklore had been circling a real nutrient for 1,000 years without ever being able to name it. This is the great theme of the middle period. The explanations were wrong, sometimes laughably so. But the collective human instinct kept returning again and again to a small set of foods that modern analysis would eventually vindicate. People were keeping good records in a language they couldn't read. Everything changes in the 20th century, and it changes fast. For all of recorded history, vitality had been a feeling, a quality, a spirit. Then, in 1935, a team of chemists isolated and named the molecule itself, testosterone. For the first time, the thing every culture had been chasing through food and folklore had a structure, a formula, and a measurable level in the blood. Within the same period, scientists worked out that the body synthesizes it from cholesterol, and that its production depends on a chain of nutrients and signals, not on the symbolic essence of any animal. This was the moment the entire conversation should have become rational. In the laboratory, it did. The biochemistry of the hormone was mapped with increasing precision through the mid-20th century. Researchers identified the roles of zinc, of vitamin D, of dietary fat, and of overall caloric sufficiency in maintaining healthy production. But out in the wider culture, something else happened. The ancient promise, eat this, become more of a man, didn't disappear when the science arrived. It simply put on a lab coat. The mystical claim became a pseudoscientific claim, and in many ways, it became harder to resist, because now it could borrow the vocabulary of real research. So let's set the record straight with what we now actually know, because this is the part that matters most. The honest, evidence-based position is this. In a man whose levels are already healthy, no food meaningfully raises testosterone beyond its normal range. The body regulates it tightly. But in a man who is deficient in key nutrients, and many men are, correcting those deficiencies through diet can restore production to where it should be. That is the real defensible version of foods that increase testosterone. Not foods that push you above normal, but foods that stop something from holding you below it. 3 nutrients do most of the heavy lifting. The first is zinc. A genuine zinc deficiency is associated with suppressed testosterone, and correcting it restores levels. This is why oysters earned their reputation, and why shellfish, red meat, and pumpkin seeds appear on every credible list. The second is vitamin D. It behaves more like a hormone than a vitamin, and low levels track with low testosterone. Fatty fish, egg yolks, and sunlight are the classic sources, which quietly explains why the fish-eating northern warrior diets we discussed earlier may have been doing more than keeping men warm. The third is dietary fat itself. Because testosterone is built from cholesterol, very low-fat diets have been shown to reduce production. Olive oil, eggs, fatty fish, nuts, and quality animal fats supply the raw material. The ancient warrior eating his fatty, protein-rich rations was, by accident, eating a hormonally supportive diet. Beyond those 3, the picture widens into something almost boring in its sensibility. Leafy greens supply magnesium, which plays a supporting role. Adequate protein supports the muscle and the metabolic environment in which the hormone operates. And this is the part the supplement industry hates. Getting enough total calories, sleeping well, training, and staying lean matter more than any single ingredient. A man who is overweight, underslept, and underfed cannot eat his way to high testosterone 1 oyster at a time. This is the modern evolution of the idea. We've traded the magic food for the sufficient diet. It's less dramatic. It's also true. Which brings us to the present and to a strange full circle. In the last few decades, the ancient promise has found its most profitable home yet. The testosterone booster supplement industry. Pills, powders, and extracts are sold with exactly the language the Greeks and the medieval apothecaries would have recognized. Eat this. Become more of a man. The ingredients are sometimes real nutrients, sometimes herbal extracts with thin or contradictory evidence. And the marketing almost always implies far more than the science supports. The pattern is identical to the one we've traced for 3,000 years. A real underlying mechanism, nutrient deficiency suppresses testosterone, gets stretched into an extravagant promise that a product can elevate a healthy man into something superhuman. The doctrine of signatures has simply become the doctrine of the label. The quiet truth underneath all of it is the same truth the warriors stumbled into without understanding. Eat enough, eat real food. Get your zinc, your vitamin D, your healthy fats, and your protein from a plate rather than a bottle. Stay lean, sleep, and train. Do that, and your body will produce what it's capable of producing. No food will make you exceptional, but the right diet will stop deficiency from making you less than you are. And that, stripped of the mythology, is what every culture in this story was actually reaching for. So that is the full arc. From the wrestler's table in ancient Greece, through the warrior diets of Rome and the North, past 1,000 years of beautiful superstition, into the laboratory of 1935, and out the other side into a supplement aisle that recycles the oldest promise in human history. The foods barely changed. Oysters, eggs, fish, meat, seeds, greens. They sit on the modern evidence-based list almost exactly where they sat on the ancient one. What changed is our understanding of why. We stopped believing food transfers the spirit of an animal, and we learned it supplies the chemistry of a hormone. The story of foods that increase testosterone isn't really the story of food at all. It's the story of how long it took us to understand our own bodies, and how even now, the old promise keeps trying to sell itself back to us. Eat like you understand the biology, not the myth. That's the whole lesson, and it took us 3,000 years to learn it.